Throughout the history of mankind, a few things have remained. Our need for food, shelter, and relations are basic needs that will never disappear. But when it comes to things such as entertainment, we've evolved, not only because of our technological advancements, but also because of our intellectual and social development through the centuries. Despite the evolution of the human psyche, one piece of entertainment has stayed the same since the beginning: storytelling. Humans have told stories ever since we were able to make comprehensible thoughts, and weirdly enough, one of the most popular genres has always been horror. Horror, fear, and terror, they're emotions that historically have kept us alive. So how come it's become a mainstream, multi-million-dollar genre that engages the audience while still tapping into our subconscious survival instincts? In the lack of a better way to phrase it, why do we seek fear? To answer this, I first want to take a look at the all-knowing, in the middle of the night creeping, man in red. Santa. The myth of Santa served the same purpose as some of the most classic stories we have: the Little Red Riding Hood, Snow White, and Hansel and Gretel. That purpose being to influence children's behavior. These classic stories focus on stranger danger, teaching children not to trust strangers, and to be careful when wandering in the woods, I guess. Obviously, the myth of Santa aims to influence kids into being nice, but in the same way these stories and myths are made to influence and enforce certain ideas, horror stories have had that same effect throughout all cultures. In folklore all over the world, there are multiple stories that are similar in nature, like the ones about water spirits such as the Nek, Vodyanoi, and Ahuisotl. These spirits are dangerous, and their stories are supposed to frighten the listeners of deep water, which in turn would have kept them safe. But how does this relate back to horror stories today, and more specifically, video games? As humans as a race evolved and learned more about survival, medicine, and the previously unknown, our interest in horror stories just increased. Through the internet, we are now able to share and record our reactions to these stories. I don't need to tell you that horror games have a huge following on YouTube, and when it comes to video games, they have a lot of things going for them. Video games have a unique ability that no other media can replicate: the ability to turn actions into reactions. Okay. In a book, you may read that a door opens behind the main character. In a movie, you might hear the creak of a door, but in a game, you'll hear the door open, and then you have to be the one to turn around and face whatever opened it.
Great.
Games will utilize almost all of our senses to pull us into the story, and we are so lucky that no matter what visual style we prefer, hearing or visual disabilities that we might have, or setting that interests us, there will always be a horror game for us to experience. The vast amount of horror games brings us back to the initial question: why do we seek fear? The simple answer is adrenaline and a rush of excitement. But horror can be so much more. Horror stories allow us to explore ideas that conventionally wouldn't fit in a regular drama. As horror changes, so have audiences. Our tolerance towards explicit content has grown. Horror stories have to put a higher focus on shock value to create the same reactions in the audience. Taking the explicit content to their extremes can make stories feel over-exaggerated, unnecessarily explicit, or even exploitative. Personally, I tend to find stories where we, the most evolved and intellectual species, decide to be cruel and inhumane, the most horrifying. I also find implied or hinted horrors to be more effective and more acceptable than some of the overly explicit scenes that we might see today. No matter my own opinion, there is no question that a lot of people have a morbid curiosity and will look for more and more graphic stories. Gore and graphic material usually will create a feeling of unease, but great sound design, a unique visual language, and a well-written story has the ability to affect you in multiple ways. Not only can it create this feeling of unease, but I believe that in this sphere we also have a greater chance of change. Take Amnesia: The Dark Descent. The twist in the story comes with a horrible realization that you, the player, used to torture people for your own gain. Horror here is used as a framing device to put guilt and disgust in the player because of the actions your character, that you've come to relate to, has done in the past. In The Return of the Obra Dinn, the horrors aren't relating back to you or the playable character at all, but rather its very unique gameplay frames the human condition as the true terror in its story to some extent. Despite having dealt with almost certain death and terrifying monsters, the crew of the Obra Dinn are the monsters I remember the most prominently. Because of the nature of the game, I can't explain further to be fair to any eventual playthroughs you might have, but I can only suggest going and experiencing it for yourself, as the game is a masterclass in visual storytelling and sound design. Little Nightmares focuses on a more common fear, but it's effective nonetheless. The feeling of being small in a large world, with little ways of defending yourself, is a feeling anyone can relate to. And especially the DLC embodies the inevitability of dealing with hardships. The range of narratives available within horror is limited to the extent that we envision and expect a certain way of expression when consuming a piece of art in the genre. However, there are always new themes to explore and new methods to form a story to explore these themes. Horror doesn't have to be the focus or framing device within a story for it to have an important place. The fear of lost gain, the fear of missing out, and the fear of expectations don't have to be the main focus of a game. Despite the main focus being on something else, whenever there are things to miss, like collectibles or specific cutscenes, our approach to a game changes. The difference between a collectathon game and a game like Alien Isolation, where crafting materials can be found wherever, is the fear of missing out, especially when achievements are at stake. Challenges and achievements can both be the root cause of a fear, but also ask the player to be scared to receive the pleasure of the achievement. Think about the good old FNAF challenge that took Markiplier hours to complete. Sure, the game might lose some of its horror since it's only predictable jump scares, but the fear changes into a fear of losing at the brink of completion.
Oh my god! Oh, I did it!
Relating to a character that turns out to be a monster will make you introspect. Seeing friends turn on each other will make you ponder your own relationships, and feeling lost and alone can make you appreciate what you got at another level. Horror is one of those themes that work just as well as a secondary theme as a primary one. Games like Half-Life or Metro, where you have the ability to defend yourself and even defeat the dreadful monsters, might not have as much of a visceral impact as we intellectually understand we're in no actual danger. However, we can still appreciate this style of horror as exploration and isolation plays a larger role in the narrative of this type of story. What makes these games scary is not the threat of a monster, but rather the fear of having to deal with the monsters all alone. In Half-Life 2, the monsters aren't as large of a problem, and you have team members who help you. Here, the horror is slightly dialed down, and the root cause isn't being alone anymore, but rather the humans and their agenda. Omori is a weird game to categorize, because while the game is great at making you feel uneasy, the main theme of the story is fear. Not in the way where you, the player, is scared, but rather the character in the game is terrified. The story is also full of sadness, solitude, and grief. Sometimes horror isn't a single emotion, and tapping into your mind in multiple ways will make you connect to a piece of media, and it will have a larger impact on you even after you're done playing. Horror really is a broad term. It differs from person to person, and even though there is a definition, the genre feathers out and interacts with media from all corners of the sphere of fiction. Fear provides a rush of adrenaline and excitement, but I can't help but to think that the reason we seek out fear in media and stories today is because of horror's way of carrying a story in a new and unique direction. The feeling of fear is a natural reaction that creates a bond between people. A shared experience that only a horror story can provide creates not only a sense of community, but can impact how we as a group act and react. Horror takes many forms, depending on what we fear the most and in what context the fear is presented. You might be an introvert, but can still fear isolation depending on how a story is presented. You can be a tightrope walker who shakes in fear of a VR flying experience. Or you can be a collector who fears missing out on items scattered around the in-game world. If you suffer from the fear of missing out, remember to subscribe to this channel for any future videos. I'd really appreciate it. Also, feel free to leave a like or a comment to help out with the algorithm. My name's Turtlekun. I hope you enjoyed this video. Remember to eat well, sleep well, and I'll see you in the next video.